Masechet Hagigah Daf Gimel, a very famous derasha on today's daf that we're going to get to, which is very exciting. And we start off with the discussion from yesterday, which was that we were talking about someone who is, Mishnah said, someone who's deaf and mute is certainly exempt from bringing the korban re'iyah, the special korban olah for coming to Yerushalayim and seeing the Bet HaMikdash. But what about someone who is only deaf or only mute? And we concluded that that person is exempt. And that was the best way to read the Baraita, and we reconciled the Mishnah with the Baraita. What we're going to do now is look for a source for that. And once we find the source, we're going to see some other similar cases of someone is deaf in one ear, they're exempt. Someone who's lame in only one leg is also exempt. Rabbi Tanhum has mentioned both of those laws. So we're going to see other derashot by Rabbi Tanhum. And that's going to take us into a further derasha about going back to Hakhel, and another report about another famous derasha. And then we'll come back to the Mishnah and give the definition of insanity. Okay, so we begin with the source that a deaf or mute are exempt. And the source is going to be from a comparison with Hakhel, which is another place where everyone must come together. Just like on the holiday, everybody has to come to Yerushalayim for the holiday. So to Hakhel, everybody has to come together to hear the Torah. And so let's see. Someone who is deaf or mute, only one or the other, must bring the shalameh simcha. That's a shalamim to celebrate the holiday. V'samachta b'chagecha, and you want to celebrate with meat. So they are obligated with that. Fine, but why should they be exempt from the olah of re'iyah? That's our question, and the answer is le'inyan re'iyah gama re'iyah mehakel. The answer is because we have the same word. It says shalosh pamim b'shana yera'eh kol zechurecha. So we have the word being seen 3 times a year, and we have the word to be seen also in the mitzvah of Hakhel, once every 7 years, when everyone gathers to hear the Torah. Tichtiv Hakhel etam v'hanashim v'hanashim v'ataf uchtiv u'bo kol Yisrael lera'ot. Right in pasuk 31:11 in Devarim, it says when everybody comes to be seen. So we have the same. Now we have a connection. Okay, I'm glad you have a connection. How do you know that in Hakhel, someone who's deaf or mute is exempt from coming? Why are people coming to Hakhel? So that they can listen and learn. They have to listen. So then someone who can speak but cannot hear is exempt, because what's the point of them coming? They won't be able to hear it anyway. And so that they will learn, well, that will exclude someone who can hear but cannot speak. Okay, now just because someone can't speak doesn't mean they can't learn. And that's the next question we're going to ask. The answer is going to be, we're going to read this as leman yelamedu, not lilmod, but lelamed, so that they can teach. And that's a nice way of reading it, so that they can hear and learn it, and they can teach. Someone who can hear but cannot speak will not be able to teach it, and therefore that they are also exempt. Okay, that's going to be the answer, but it's going to take, we're going to go through a story first to get to the answer. So now let's see the question. What are you telling me, that someone who cannot speak is not able to learn? That's not true, right? Someone who can hear, even if they can't speak, they have perfectly sound mind. And here is a proof. There were these 2 people who could not speak. They were in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and they were grandsons of the daughter of Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgodav. Amri la bnei Achted Rabbi Yochanan. Some say they were the they were the nephews of Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so the cholem atahava ayil Rabbi lebel midrasha avu aleviat vekamayu, and whenever Rabbi Yehuda Nasi would come to the Bet Midrash, they would come and they would sit right there in the front of the class. And they would nod their heads, indicating that they understood and following along. They were moving their lips like they were trying to repeat the words. But because they couldn't speak, no one knew if they were actually following along or just nodding senselessly. One day the Biuda Nasi prayed for them and they got better and they could speak. And turns out after years of sitting there in the shiur, they turned out that they learned the Mishnah, the Midrash Halacha, and all of the Talmud. Talmud here doesn't mean Talmud, the Gemara, because they lived before the Gemara, but rather all of the ways that we derive one thing from another. And so you see, they were experts that whole time. They couldn't speak, so we had no idea. This reminds me
So Michelle Farber said this morning that this was her favorite. This is her favorite story in all of the Talmud.
Beautiful.
Michelle Farber, who's doing Hadran for women. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. And this reminds me of a story when I was in YU. I was in one Rav Khan's shiur, and there was someone in the shiur who could not move at all in a motorized wheelchair, could only move his eyes, and he would come and sit in the front every day. Sometimes he would join me in my chavruta, and we had no idea if he was ever following along or not, because he could have been the greatest genius or not, because he wasn't able to respond. But I remember Rav Khan would always turn to him and says, he's following. I don't know about anybody else here. Okay. Amar mod zutara. Okay, anyway, the point of this of the story is someone who can hear but can't speak can follow along just fine. So there's no reason to exclude that person from leman yilmedu. And so the answer is, the people coming for Hakhel, they should be able to hear and teach. And therefore, someone who either cannot hear or cannot speak is exempt. Once we know that about Hakhel, then we transfer that over to Iyah, and the same is true for the Korban Olat Iyah. Someone who's mute or deaf also is exempt. Good. That's more Zutra. And Rabbi Ashe is going to back him up and say, you got to be right. That has to be the right reading. Because if you say it's that the people come to Hakhel to learn, and if you would say that someone who cannot speak cannot learn, well, someone who can't hear also can't learn. I mean, that's talking about in those days when they didn't have methods of teaching deaf people. This would all be different today. So, well, then both of them can be learned from leman yishmeu. Both someone who can hear and someone who can't speak, they both cannot learn. So we can derive both of those from leman yishmeu. And so then why would you need leman yilmedu? That would just be extras, not needed. Rather must be that's not true. Someone who cannot speak can learn just fine, but nevertheless is exempt because they cannot teach. Okay, very good. And Amar Rabbi Tanhum. So now that we resolve that, Rabbi Tanhum is going to teach yet something else. Okay, now meaning a similar law. Someone who is deaf in one ear, he can hear in one ear but not in the other, also exempt from bringing Korban Re'iyah because he's exempt from Hakhel. How do we know that person exempt from Hakhel? Because in Hakhel it says, go and teach the law to Israel in their ears. Ears is plural. That means you're only obligated if you can hear in two ears. Okay. Hold on. The challenge to the Rabbi Tanhum, we need this pasuk be'oznehem to say that you have to teach within the earshot of all the Jewish people, that you have someone, way in the back, and he can't even hear. He showed up, but he can't hear. No, that's not good. Everybody has to be there and be present, be able to hear. So we need Be'oznehem for that. This is no. We can learn that from another pasuk. That we learned that they have to teach before all of Israel. So if it's before them, that means they have to be present. No, if it only said that means I know they have to be present. But I wouldn't necessarily know that they have to be within an earshot. And that's why it says be'oznehem, to say that they actually have to be able to hear. This is, some guy's all the way in the back, and he says, what did he say? Blessed are the cheesemakers. Who cares about the cheesemakers? All right. And therefore, we do need be'oznahem to teach that they have to be an earshot, so we can't use it for Rabbi Tanhum's derasha, so we're still left in a question. And the final answer is, Hahu melama'an yishme'u nafka. The halacha that people have to be close enough to hear, we will learn from the word lama'an yishme'u. Okay, now I know we just used this to teach that someone who is deaf but can speak is exempt because they have to hear. But actually, I think you could use this for both. The point is that you have to be able to hear. That means two things. We could learn two things from that. You have to be hearing, your ears have to work, and you have to be close enough that you can actually hear. So I think it makes sense that to derive both from this, because we can learn you have to be earshot from this. The word be'oznahem is in fact extra, and we learn from be'oznahem that someone that is 2 ears and someone who is deaf in 1 ear is exempt. Amar Rabbi Tanhum. Rabbi Tanhum continues along lines of these half cases. Chiger beraglo achat patur min ha're'iyah shene'emar regalim. Someone who's lame in 1 leg, you can walk on 1 leg fine, but not the other one. Exempt, because it says regalim, right? They're called shalosh regalim, and regel comes from the word leg, meaning plural legs. So someone has to have full capacity of both legs. Hold on, don't we need that word regalim to teach me that someone who has a prosthetic leg is exempt? You have to be your own biological legs and not an artificial leg. So we can't learn this law of only one layman one. No, that you have to have natural legs in order to be obligated. I can learn from the word pe'amim, shalosh pe'amim bashana. Now, pe'amim means times, but actually, pe'amim also means feet. The Tanya, pe'amim and pe'amim ela, raglayim v'chen omer tirmesena, regel, ragle ani, pame dalim. Pasuk in Yeshaya says, the foot shall tread it down, even the feet of the poor and the steps of the needy. So you can see from the parallelism here that pame is the same as, means the same thing as ragle. And Shir Hashirim, how beautiful are your feet. In sandals, daughter of the prince. So this is a very good. They opened up their concordance and they say, yes, pa'amim means feet, and therefore, since I know the law that you have to have the prosthetic, someone who doesn't have 2 full legs is exempt from coming. So then the word regalim is extra, and from the regalim I can learn someone who's lame in 1 leg also is exempt. Okay, now that we mentioned this pasuk in Shir Hashirim, we're going to elaborate on it further. Right, what does it mean? Your feet are beautiful in sandals. Obviously, this is a metaphor, something about the relationship between Bnei Israel and Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the answer is, right, how beautiful are the feet of Israel when they come on pilgrimage. Right, Hashem looks and says, look at that, all their feet, they're all marching and coming to Yerushalayim. So you see, it's directly related to our context. Bat Nadiv, now we go on. What does it mean? The Banelim Bat Nadiv, the daughter of a prince. Why is Bnei Israel called the daughter of a prince? Beto shel Abraham Abinu shenikra Nadiv, because we are the descendants. In the Mashal, Bnei Israel is always the wife, the girlfriend, the daughter. And so we, all Bnei Israel, are the descendants of Abraham, and Abraham was called the prince. Elohe Abraham. The prince of people gather, the people of the God of Abraham. So you see that Abraham is the people of the Nadiv. Elohe Abraham. Now we ask, how come it says they got together, those of the nation of Abraham? What about the other avot? How come they're not mentioned here? Abraham was the first of the converts. He was the first to go and travel from foreign land and come to Israel, and so that mimics what the people coming for Aliyah Laregel are also doing. They're coming. They're coming together. And since he was the first to create the nation, so therefore the whole nation is also called by his name, Am Abraham. Rav Kahana. Darash Rav Natan bar Yomi mishum Rabbi Tanhum. Okay, now another derasha by the same Rabbi Tanhum. Rabbi Tanhum was famous for his derashot. That's what we call the Tanhuma. Is a whole midrash that's named after him because it begins with derasha by this sage. A famous one, when the brothers threw Yosef into a pit, says the pit was empty, there was no water. Well, that's redundant. If it's empty, that means there's nothing in it. So obviously there's no water. Oh, so that additional phrase, there was no water, is actually a hint to say, yeah, there was no water in it. That might have been good and sustained him, but there was in fact something else in it. It was empty of water, but it was full of snakes and scorpions, which really makes it much worse that they threw him to a pit with snakes and scorpions. That would have tortured him and killed him. Okay, Tenora Banan, Maaseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka, Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma, Shehalchu lakbil penei Rabbi Yoshua bifki'in. Just back to our outline. So we discussed all these cases, and we started talking about some derashot. And now, since we brought a source, the main source is from Hakhel, so we're going to now bring another very famous derasha about the importance of Hakhel. So here's the story. That these various sages went to visit Rabbi Yoshua, who lived in Piki'in. This is the famous Rabbi Yoshua, the one who stood up on his feet and said, Lo b'shamayim he lived in Piki'in. It was a custom of students to go visit their teacher on the holiday. And so they went to visit him. And so Rabbi Yoshua says, oh, you guys were in the Bet Midrash. Tell me, what was the new teaching that was given in the Bet Midrash? And the students say, so we are your students. We drink from your water. You teach us something. Even so, that I'm your teacher. I'll teach you a lot. Don't worry. But every time there's a Bet Midrash session, for sure, something new has come about. So he insists, you have to tell me what you learned in the Bet Midrash today. It sounds like my kids, they come from school. What did you learn in school today? Nothing. You have to pry it out of them. Okay, Shabbat Shalmi Haita. So Rabbi Yoshua asks, whose turn was it? Whose week was it to teach? Okay, this is referring to the famous story of Rabban Gamliel. When Rabban Gamliel was the Nasi, he was the head of the Bet Midrash, and he was kind of authoritarian. He wouldn't allow any dissent. Anyone had a different opinion from him, he would make him stand up, embarrass him, my way or the highway was Rabban Gamliel. Until the rabbis got so fed up, he embarrassed Rabbi Yoshua, right, publicly a couple of times. And so the rabbis were so fed up, they deposed Rabban Gamliel from his position of Nasi. They kicked him out. And then they brought in instead Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. That's why he says, Hare'ani kiben shivim shana, because he was too young for the job, so he had to look old. Then he was around. Finally, in that story, Rabban Gamliel realizes his mistake. He comes back and he says, "Okay, I won't be a bully anymore. I'll be tolerant and allow people in." And so they make a compromise that Rabban Gamliel would teach 3 weeks, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah would teach for 1 week. And so that's why he asks Shabbat Shalmi Haita, who was presiding over the Bet Midrash on that day where you just came from. And so they said Shabbat Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Hita. It was in fact the turn of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah to teach. And so he says, and what did he talk about? The topic was Hakhel. Right? Rabbi Yoshua has to keep asking them questions. They don't want to say. So finally they say, okay, we'll tell you. Here was his derasha. Hakhel ta'am hanashim v'hanashim ba'ataf. Im hanashim ba'im lilmod, nashim ba'ot lishmoa, taf lama ba'in. So you have to bring together the man, the woman, and the children. The men are coming to learn. The women are coming to hear. Children, why are they coming? I mean, if they're old enough, they could learn and hear, but I'm assuming that they're young and they don't understand what's going on. Why bother bringing the children to the lecture? The answer is to give reward to those who are bringing them, right? So the parents are bringing them, and they get reward for coming together, which is shows you until today you should bring your kids to shul, even if they're not following everything. They get into the habit, and that's the merit. As long as they're quiet. And so Rabbi Yoshua says, you had this wonderful pearl of wisdom and you were going to keep it from me, right? I can't believe that you weren't going to tell me that. What a fantastic thing. I never heard that before. What a chidush. Okay, with that encouragement, now the students go on and said, oh, darash. Oh, Rabbi Elazar Azariah said more. Et Adonai he'emarta hayom v'Adonai he'emirecha hayom. The beautiful pasuk in Devarim that says, you have affirmed this day that Hashem is your God. And in turn, Hashem has affirmed that you are his people. This is a Berit formula, right? Where kind of both, it's almost like a kiddushin, right? That mikudeshet, you are designated to me. We say to Hashem, and Hashem says to us in Moshe's speech. אמר להם הקדוש ברוך הוא לישראל, אתם עשיתוני חטיבה אחת בעולם, ואני אעשה אתכם חטיבה אחת בעולם. So what does this, he explained, what does this mean? Hashem says, you have made me a single entity in the world. In other words, Bnei Israel have taught and announced that Hashem is one. As so too, Hashem midah keneged midah says, I'm going to make you a single entity in the world, meaning I'm going to make you a special, treasured nation, right? You did that for me, I'll do that for you. Where do we see that we made Hashem one? From the pasuk Shema Yisrael, God is one. And I will make you one, singular, unique in the world. Who is like your people? One nation, right? A special nation in the land. Okay, another beautiful derasha. And now they go on, right? Once you get the students started, that's it. They're gonna say everything. Okay, this is a long, a very famous, a very important derasha. It's on this pasuk in Kohelet. Kohelet is talking about wisdom, and he says, Divrei Chachamim, the words of the sages are kador banot. They're like goads and like nails fixed in prodding sticks. So shepherds, when they want to get the oxen to go a certain way, they had a long stick and they had a nail at the end, and they would prod the ox to go this way so that it would go straight and pull a plow in the right way. And so the words of wisdom are like that for us, right? The sages are teaching us wisdom, are making sure that we go in the right path and don't veer this way or that way. So the wisdom is always prodding us. And then it says, like Ba'ale Asufot nitenu meroe echad. We'll see what Ba'ale Asufot means in the derasha. And all were given by one shepherd. All the words of wisdom are given, just like a shepherd is giving the prodding, so too the words of wisdom that the rest of Kohelet are all about are given by one shepherd and lead us to a good thing. Okay, so we read the pasuk. Composed in collections. Maybe in that the original means that the words of wisdom are put into collections of books, like Mishle, like Kohelet, and they all come from one shepherd. All right. Okay, this is already very interesting. The pasuk talked about divrei chachamim, words of wisdom, and you look in Mishle and Kohelet, they're like words of general wisdom. But of course, the rabbi is going to say, "What do you mean words of wisdom? This is not just a general wisdom. This is words of Torah." So they equate wisdom with Torah, which makes sense. And so now he's going to atomize this pasuk, meaning he's going to take every word and say, what is the significance of this word? And how does the next word add to the one before in a kind of dialectical Hegelian approach? Each word explains better the word before till you get to an exact, almost like each word is prodding us. Don't go too much this way and don't go too much that way. So this pasuk is doing exactly what it says words of wisdom are supposed to do. So let's see, how does that work? Why does the pasuk here compare the words of the Torah to a goad or prodding stick? Just like a prodding stick will set straight the cow so that in its furrow, so that it can plow the field and therefore produce fruits and vegetables and bring life to the world, so too the words of Torah set us in the right, set in the path, those who study it and go to the right path, from the path of death to the path of life. So both bring life by teaching us the right way. Good. But we can't stop there with that analogy, because after all, a goat is a movable item. It's just a little stick. So you're going to say the words of Torah are also movable and changeable and not permanent? Talmud Omar masmerot. That's why the next word in pasuk is like nails, right? Just like nails, you knock it in, it's permanent. So too the words of Torah are unchanging, permanent, and strong. Okay, but we can't stop there, because the nature of it is in nails that when you bang it in, it goes down, gets smaller and smaller. So is that a good analogy? Would you say that Torah, though, as you study it and over time it gets smaller and smaller? We don't want to say that. So it's not exactly like a nail. Fastened. Nituim also means planted. So planted, just like when you plant something, it actually grows. So too, the words of Torah, they actually grow over time. The more you learn it, the more it's studied, the more it grows. So therefore, it's not exactly like a nail. It's also like something that's planted. Good. What does it mean? These things are collected. They are in collections. So rather than collections of books, this refers to it's referring to collections of sages and students who get together in groups and groups. So now we're describing a bet midrash, right? You imagine different chavrutot and different groups, and one group comes together and they say this thing is tameh, and the other group says it's tahor. It might be referring to the same exact thing. And then one group says something as asur, one says very same thing as mutar. It's describing the machloket, the controversy, and active discussion of all the topics. Some say pasul, some say kasher. And now, Shema Yomar Hadam, Hachani Lamed Torah Me'at. This is why it's so beautiful. We're actually going to the mind of a student. Imagine a student walking into a big bustling Bet Midrash and hearing the cacophony of all these different voices. And he says, how can I possibly learn Torah? Right? This one says allowed, this one says not allowed. It's very confusing. And it looks like there's no truth here, right? There's no one truth. Talmud Omar, כולם ניתנו מרוע אחד, אל אחד נתנן. פרנס אחד המרן, מפי אדון כל המעשים, ברוך הוא דכתיב, וידבר אלוהים את כל הדברים האלה. So that's why we learned that all, that's the last words on Pasuk are, all were given by one shepherd. Meaning they're all from Hashem. They're all from one Parnas, meaning Moshe, who provide one provider, from the master of all things, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So even though, it looks like there's a lot of different opinions here, and this cacophonous, and how am I going to do this? All the opinions that you hear, asur, mutar, right, tameh, tahor, are all given from one place, as it says. This is right before the Ten Commandments. Hashem said all of these words. Therefore, here's the advice. Make your ear like a funnel. Here's an ancient funnel, right? And say what a funnel does. It takes lots of different things and makes it smaller and tighter so that you can fit into a bottle. So our minds are like a bottle, and it's a lot, but you gotta collect it and organize it. Have an understanding heart, so that you can figure out the reasons for someone who says tameh and the one who says tahor. The one who says prohibited, one who says permitted. The one who says invalid and the one who says it's valid. ולשון הזה אמר להם, אין דור יתום של רבי אלעזר בן עזריה שרוי בתוכו. So that was the end of the derasha, and the point is that the words of wisdom, right, guide us. You see how each word, right, says not too much this way, not too much that way, right? It's permanent, but it also grows, and therefore both sides of that dialectic are important in order to get to the absolute, to the truth. The truth is actually complex, and you have to have all of the combination of ideas in order to appreciate the multifaceted truth of Nevuah and of the Torah. Okay, absolutely beautiful derasha, inspiring until today. And the Rabbi Yoshua's response was, a generation that has a Elazar ben Azariah in it is not an orphan generation, right? So really beautiful. Okay, that's the end of that meeting of the rabbis coming to Rabbi Yoshua, and we get to learn. We started with Hakhel, and we learned lots of other things. Now we have a question on the story. In the beginning of the story, they came to Rabbi Yoshua, and they said, Rabbi Yoshua says, tell me a chidush bet midrash. And they didn't want to tell him. They kept refusing. And the question is why? Why didn't they just tell him right away? What were they scared of? Right? He asked what's in the bet midrash. Why were they holding back? And here's the answer. There's another story that happened before this in which students said something to the master. A student said something to the master about what he heard in the bet midrash, and it didn't go well. And the teacher got angry. And so when everybody heard that, nobody wants to say something and repeat it to the teacher. Okay, so this is the previous story. Detanya. Rabbi Yosef ben Dur Maskit shalach lakbil peneh Rabbi Eliezer belod. Yosef ben Dur Maskit went to visit Rabbi Eliezer. This Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos, the famous one who was excommunicated by the sages for insisting on the oven of Achnai is tahor, and Rabbi Yoshua is the one there that said, was against him and said, Lo b'shamayim hi. Rabban Gamliel from the previous story is the one that was in charge of the excommunication and was punished in the end for it. So all these stories, they're all interconnected. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkenos, known to have a fiery personality, Amar lo, ma chidush haya bebet hamidrash hayom. So he asked the same question. A student comes to visit, says, tell me, what did they say in the bet midrash today? In that story, he didn't refuse because there was no reason yet to be scared. They discussed and they voted and decided that Ammon and Moab, are they part of Israel or not? Is the question. So in Israel, during the 7th year, you can't work the land. How about Ammon and Moab? They were conquered by Moshe. Are they part of the land or not? They decided that they are not part of the land of Israel, and therefore you can work the land on Shavuot. Laws of Shavuot do not apply to it, and whatever grows, whatever grows, we give maaser to the poor people, and that's helpful because the poor people are during Shavuot. Very little grows in the land, and everybody is looking for food, and especially the poor people are going to be very hungry. And so the rabbi said, you know what? Let's allow Ammon and Moab to be farmed in Shavuot, and we'll give a tenth to the poor people, and that will help them out during the Shavuot year. That was a beautiful thing that the law that they decided. So the student thinking Rabbi Eliezer would be happy, but he wasn't. Amar lo Yoseh. Peshot yadecha bekabel einecha. Rabbi Eliezer said, Yosef, open your hands because your eyes are falling out, and catch your eyes before they fall on the floor. Okay, very dramatic thing. Reminds me of a scene from Minority Report, if you know that movie. Okay, so what's the point? So Pashat yadav vekibel einav, and so he did. He became blinded. Idea is that you think you're so great that you decided this, but you are blind to the halacha, and like midah kemidah, you don't deserve your eyes. Bachar Rabbi Eliezer ve'amar, Sod Adonai lira'av ubrito lehodi'am. He cried and said, the counsel of Hashem is with those who fear him, the covenant to make them known to it. So the idea here is it's like a secret that even though it's true, what they said is the correct halacha, but they don't even know why that is the halacha. They came to it through logic and discussion and a vote. But here's why Rabbi Eliezer was upset. אמר לו, לך אמור להם, אל תחושו למניינכם, כך מקובלני מרבן יוחנן בן זכאי ששמע מרבו, הלכתה למשה מסיני, עמון ומואב מעשרים מעשר, אני בשביעית. מה טעם? הרבה כרכים כבשו עולי מצרים ולא כבשום עולי בבל. So he says, go tell the rabbis in the Bet Midrash. Says, don't consider your vote, right? Your vote is meaningless and happens to be correct, but it doesn't matter because I have a tradition from my teacher, Rabbi Zakai, and he's heard from his teacher, halacha going all the way back to Har Sinai, that these lands of Ammon and Moab, they can be farmed during the Shvi'it year, and that produce will become ma'ased ani. What's the reason? Because there were many cities that were conquered by the generation that left Mitzrayim in Moshe's generation, and that's true, but they were not recaptured when after the exile, when they came back from Bavel. The lands in Israel were recaptured, but Ammon and Moab were not captured. And the kedusha from the first generation of Moshe, they made it holy and part of Israel, but not permanently, because anything that was from that generation became holy only for its time while they lived there, but not forever. And then when they came back from Bavel, they said, you know what, let's not make these lands holy, meaning part of Israel, because we want to help out the poor people during the Shvi'it year, and they can go and they can have the 10th of produce. And so this is actually an original halacha that's based on tradition. And so I know the tradition. And so Rabbi Eliezer is upset because Rabbi Eliezer, he only ever said something, taught something, if he had a tradition behind it. That he was a traditionalist, and he knew so many traditions that the students didn't know. When they excommunicated him, they stopped coming to study with him. And so they lost out on knowledge of all these traditions. And so now Rabbi Eliezer is very upset that in the Bet Midrash, they're sitting and discussing this law like nobody knows it, and they happen to vote and come to the right conclusion, but he was very angry that they didn't come and ask him and include him, because if he was there, he would have told them that there is an old tradition about it, and he would have had that authority. And so he's just lamenting how the excommunication has led to the loss of true Torah knowledge. Okay, Tana, Quote of the story is after the Rabbi Eliezer calmed down, then he prayed and said, may the eyes of Yosef return to their sockets, and they did return. So there's a happy ending. Why do we bring all this? The point is that once that story happened, then everybody else heard about it, and everybody was scared to ever teach something in front of their master, because Rabbi Eliezer, look what happened, how upset he got that time. And so that's why the students of Rabbi Yoshua said, no, you teach us something. We don't want to say anything. But of course, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer are different personalities. All right, so we get to have that connection between these two very famous stories and all these great personalities. And now we go back to the Mishnah. Said that someone who's shoteh, who was not of sound mind, is exempt from all mitzvot, exempt from all at re'iyah. How do you know? How do you define insanity? Someone who goes out alone at night. Why are you walking around alone at night? It's dangerous. Or someone who goes and sleeps in a cemetery, or someone who tears his clothing, not for mourning, you just wanton destruction. So these are crazy things to do. Okay, so that's a baraita. Now, itim Rav Huna amar ad shiyu kulan bebat achat. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu b'achat mehen. There's two explanations of this baraita. Rav Huna in Bavel says you have to do all three of them in order to be considered insane. He says at once, doesn't mean necessarily at once. It's not like you have to rip your clothes in the cemetery. It means someone who does all three, that shows he's insane. Rabbi Yochanan says that even if someone does one of them, these are crazy things to do, and that shows that he's insane and therefore patur. Okay. Now the Gemara, the stam of the Gemara, is commenting on those two opinions and asking which case are they talking about? If someone is doing it in an insane way, right? Someone who's walking around at night and making noises and acting weird. Well, then everyone should agree that even doing one of them, you could see from his behavior that this person's insane. If he's not doing it in an insane way, right? He's working perfectly normally. He happened to be going out at night. Maybe he has to, go get some diapers or something. He has some reason to go out. And so even if he does all three of them, if he does it in an intelligent way, maybe he has a reason to do them, and so he should not be considered insane. So which case are we talking about? The answer is no, he's doing it in a way that is insane. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is actually insane if he does one of these things in a strange way, because maybe he's sleeping in the cemetery because he wants some impure spirit to come upon him. These people would do this if they want to get like a dream, or they want to know something from some spiritual source. They would sleep in a cemetery because they think there's ghosts around in the cemetery, and then they'll be able to know something from that spiritual world. And so, I mean, that is actually crazy, but there is some logic behind that, and even sane people do that sometimes. Someone who goes out at night, maybe he got a fever and he's going out to cool himself down. And so even though it's somewhat crazy behavior, there could be some normal logic behind it. And if someone's tearing his garments, maybe he's very anxious, stressed out about something. He's not even realizing he's not doing it in order to destroy. He's doing it because he's anxious, and that's how he's expressing it. So kevan da'abdinu lechulhu, so each one by itself, maybe it's like temporarily very anxious, but doesn't mean he's insane. But if he does all three, then that would be like an ox that goes and gores an ox, a donkey, and a camel, even though they're three different animals. So nevertheless, that's considered mu'ad. If he does only one, it's not mu'ad. If he does all three, now that shows his the violent nature of the ox. And so too, a person that does all these three things shows that he is not all there. Amara Papa, Ishemiya le the Rav Huna had the Tanya, Ezehu shote, Zemeabed Koma Shenotnim lo Hava Hadarbe. The Papa, now a later generation, says if Rav Huna would have known the following baraita, not every Amora knew every baraita. The Papa knew this one. If Rav Huna would have known it, he would have changed his mind. The Baraita says, what does that mean, an insane person? Someone who destroys everything you give him, right? You give him, a nice vase, he breaks it. You give him a nice piece of clothing, he tears it. And so that person is insane. If he heard that, he would have changed his mind. What does that mean? Rav Huna said you have to do all three to be insane. But in this baraita, even just one of them, even just tearing clothing, not also going to the cemetery and also going out at night. And so he would have changed his mind to be like the Bilchanan, that you all need only one. And final question, Ibailehu. When Papa said he would have changed his mind, he would have changed his mind to say what? Would he have changed his mind and only regarding tearing clothes? And he would have said someone who tears his clothes, that person is insane, because that's similar to what it says here, someone who destroys anything you give him. But maybe he would have said that going to the cemetery, by itself, no, because that's not like the one here. Or maybe he would have changed his mind altogether and said, just like in this case, even doing one action deems someone insane, so too any of the other actions singly, going out at night or going to sleeping in a cemetery by themselves, would make that person insane. And the answer is teko. We're not sure. After all, Rav Huna is not around to ask. And Rav Papa was just saying, theoretically, if he would have known this, he would have changed his mind. Would he have changed his mind totally, completely, or only partially? That question is left standing. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.